This would probably only happen if America didn't exist. But let's assume that somehow, either by mind control or the non-existence of America, Europe never colonizes the Americas. The colonization of the Americas more than doubled the global supply of silver and boosted economic growth. Without it, religious wars leave Europe divided and exhausted, and the trade route around Africa remains just a source of luxury for wealthy Europeans. Without the money from the Americas, the scientific revolution never took off. We progressed slowly, and perhaps today we are where we were scientifically around 1700 or so. Maybe. The world is still a world of monarchies. Women are still oppressed. Most people are still farmers. But let's look at the Americas in 1492. There were two royal empires and some relatively small kingdoms. The Inca and Aztec empires were in many ways similar to the early fertile empires of Mesopotamia, with polytheistic religions and some strong and rapidly developing agricultural empires with a lot of city-states. What you would expect to start happening would be the frequent formation of several large native empires and the beginnings of several monotheistic religions. Eventually, you'd get an intelligent military and political leader. Every continent had them, from Alexander the Great to Shaka Zulu and Genghis Khan. They would probably originate around Central America and create a huge empire, from the Andes to the Great Plains. Now, you would soon have a root for a common language, similar to Latin, and shared religious beliefs over a large area of land. Eventually, we would see a decline in this empire, probably a few generations after its rapid growth, but its inventions, laws, and cultures would prevail in the Americas. Now, all of this would happen much more slowly than in Europe and Asia due to the lack of large, tameable animals. The lack of horses or oxen would be devastating for any great civilization. Perhaps the llama and maybe some limited use of well-trained bison would be used, but overall, most movement would be on foot or by boat. Boat? Right. There are two major river systems on the continent, the Mississippi and the Amazon. But you see, the Mississippi is surrounded by fertile land while the Amazon is surrounded by jungle. So I don't think it's unlikely that the area around the former would become the most advanced area on the continent due to the much easier transportation of goods and ideas. Eventually, if technology reaches a point where long-distance ship travel becomes feasible, perhaps the natives will discover Europe. If that's the case, history will take a sharp turn. If some invisible force were to block the discovery of the Americas for the rest of eternity, then it would still be populated by various species of animals that live in seclusion. But in terms of colonization, Europe would concentrate and fight for Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. The Spanish Empire will probably never emerge or be as powerful as our timeline. And without American colonization and revolution, Napoleon loses the opportunity to emerge, which rules out the German Empire and the World Wars. The Inca civilization may have made great gains. Many early civilizations died out in the early stages in the Americas, as they were unable to adapt to climate change or man-made changes in their areas, deforestation. However, the Incas were a much larger civilization, so some part of the empire would survive any calamity and therefore whatever was lost in temporary disasters. The Inca may have expanded, adapted domesticated plants and animals from other American areas and generated derivative civilizations based on the Inca model on all continents. They could even have expanded into the Pacific, as the Polynesians did in the other direction, and perhaps started trading with Asia or the Australian/Oceanic islands. The four continents would be very overpopulated. The population density of the world would be around 30 per kilometer. Now it's around 15 per kilometer. And if the European powers didn't play with blood and lives, there would be 40 of them. The superpower we know as the United States of America would never emerge. So the world would be about 5 to 10 years behind. The colonial period in most countries would have been longer because the European powers would have been fighting mercilessly. So when a country gained independence, it would be conquered by another power. The Atlantic Ocean would not be the busiest route. It's more likely that the Mediterranean Indian body of water would be too busy. Europe would be slightly poorer than we see it today. The mines in America have made them very rich. Mandarin Chinese would be the most widely spoken language in the world, since the largest English-speaking population is in the USA. So we would be learning Mandarin instead of English or Spanish, even if our country was colonized by a European power. China would be the new ruler after the fall of the European powers. The USA had and has a lot of influence on our lives in this timeline. Native Americans and America's wildlife would coexist peacefully. They wouldn't know about the Eastern Hemisphere and would think they're just on Earth, as we would think we are, in the alternative timeline. But the Native Americans would act like Europeans because we're all human. The Americas could have followed the same path that Europeans, Asians, or Africa accept, at a much slower pace.